Hi there. You're standing on the banks of the Nile, and then everything feels eternal. The river, the sand, the construction, the exhaustion deep in your bones. Morning arrives. Just another endless day among the shouts of overseers and the clatter of stones. You think you're part of something grand, but in reality, your labor will vanish from history faster than footprints on a wet shore. But before you get comfortable, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you're watching from and what time it is there. I'm really curious to see who's joined us today. Now, get comfortable. We're just getting started. You are standing by the banks of the Nile, and frankly, it is a bit colder than you expected. The morning mist wraps around your legs like an old cat, one that smells faintly of fish and refuses to leave, no matter how politely you ask. Dawn is here, though in Egypt that means the light creeps up slow and yellow, filtering through dust and the ever present buzz of insects that regard your presence as, at best, an inconvenience. Your sandals are already damp. You know, even at this early hour, that by midday, your feet will be encased in a crust of mud that refuses to come off for days. The reeds that grow by the river wave gently in the breeze, whispering secrets about the lives that have passed through here. Every important event in Egypt seems to involve this river. Kings were crowned here, sacrifices made, and sometimes, just sometimes, someone got the idea to build something so large, so excessive, that even the gods might look down and raise an eyebrow. The Nile is not just a river, it is a lifeline, an accidental master that gives and takes in equal measure. Without the annual flood, there is no food, no crops, no life. The soil is dark and fertile, thick with the promise of a good harvest, or if things go wrong, a particularly vivid famine. Your ancestors spent centuries learning to read its moods, calculating the right moment to plant barley and emmer wheat, or, on particularly adventurous years, attempting peas. Not everyone survived those experiments, but for now, there is peace. The only sound is the distant bray of a donkey, probably annoyed that it must work before the sun is fully awake. You watch as the first rays of the sun break over the horizon, turning the surface of the Nile into a slab of hammered gold. In the distance, shadows rise against the light, the silhouettes of unfinished pyramids, vast and geometric, like a child's toy blocks left scattered by a careless god. Here, on this ancient bank, you realize something profound. For all the power and mystique attributed to Egypt, its beating heart is muddy, slow, and just a little bit annoying when it comes to personal hygiene. The mighty river that sustains pharaohs and peasants alike is also responsible for the ruined hem of your tunic and the unpleasant squelching that accompanies every step you take. The scent of silt and decay is not exactly inspirational, but this is where everything begins. You look around at your fellow early risers, some bleary eyed, some already shouting instructions, and a few pretending to be more awake than they really are. There are fishermen checking their nets, women balancing pots on their heads, and in the distance, a few slaves dragging bundles of papyrus for reasons known only to the bureaucrats. Everyone is here because the Nile demands it. It is both stage and audience, judge and jury, and occasionally, when the crocodiles are feeling bored, executioner. The pyramids, even unfinished, are impossible to ignore. They loom with the promise of immortality, or more accurately, with the silent accusation that you are not working fast enough. The stones shimmer in the golden light, and you can almost see the thousands of hands that placed them, the backs that bent, and the feet that blistered. Each block is a history lesson carved from exhaustion and stubbornness. The laborers will not be remembered, but the stones will outlive empires. You allow yourself a moment of melancholy. You wonder if, millennia from now, someone will stand where you stand and feel the same sense of smallness, of being caught in the slow, grinding machinery of something greater than themselves. Perhaps you think this is what it means to be Egyptian, to stand by the river at dawn, surrounded by mud, history, and the quiet certainty that whatever comes next, it will not be easy. And as the sun climbs higher, you take a deep breath, part hope, part resignation. The day is just beginning, and the pyramids are not going to build themselves. Neither, it seems, will your breakfast. You are still standing at the water's edge, eyes half open, when the first boats come into view. They move slowly, pushed along by the current, their wooden hulls creaking in a language only the river truly understands. The sun is now bright enough to turn every ripple silver, and you squint, pretending this is what makes your eyes water, not the thought of the long day ahead. The river is alive. Barges drift by, piled with blocks of stone so heavy that the boats sit low in the water, threatening to disappear at any moment. The stones are not going to walk themselves from the quarry to the pyramid, and so they travel like reluctant passengers on these ancient rafts, carved from trees that grew, perhaps, along the banks of the Nile itself. You notice there are no nails holding these boats together, just rope and faith, which, as you have come to realize, is the preferred building material for everything in Egypt. On another boat, you spot men, some rowing, others simply sprawled across the cargo, their heads wrapped in linen to keep the flies away. You can tell which men are new to this by the color of their faces. Too pale, too unmarked by sunburn and despair. Give them a week, and they will look like everyone else, their expressions set in that same tired grimace that says, "This is not what I signed up for." You try not to laugh, but you remember that career choice was not an option here. People end up where they are told to go, and if that means rowing stones down the Nile, then so be it. Someone must have convinced them long ago that being part of something big was worth the aches and blisters. You suspect that someone is now very dead, and probably remembered only as that one who gave good speeches. Some of the boats are smaller, carrying jars of water, bundles of food, or, on less fortunate days, the injured or the dead. There is a rhythm to it all, the creak of wood, the slap of water, the soft chanting of rowers keeping time. It is almost musical if you ignore the smell. You have learned not to ask what, exactly, is rotting beneath the piles of nets and baskets. You watch as one boat, stacked with rough bread and sour smelling beer, wobbles dangerously close to a sandbar. The pilot curses, loudly and inventively. No one looks surprised. This is the morning traffic jam, and if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the ghost of an overseer complaining about logistics. It occurs to you that not much has changed in the last 4,000 years. Commuting is still a pain, and no one ever arrives on time. Somewhere upriver, you hear the distant sound of a horn. That will be the shipment from the southern quarries, granite, impossibly heavy, coming from so far away that you wonder who first decided it was a good idea to drag rocks hundreds of miles for the sake of a dead king's afterlife. You try to imagine pitching that idea at a meeting. Here's what we do. We carve blocks heavier than 10 grown men, float them down the river, drag them through the sand, and stack them until they look like a mountain. Surely someone must have laughed. Surely. But there they are, the boats and their cargo, living proof that laughter is not always enough to stop a bad idea from becoming reality. You look at the people on the riverbank, supervisors with sticks, scribes with their bundles of papyrus, families waiting for husbands and fathers to come ashore. You see a group of children throwing pebbles at a half submerged log. There is a sense of waiting in the air, as if the whole of Egypt is holding its breath, waiting for the next disaster or miracle, whichever comes first. In the thickening light, the pyramids are less dreamlike and more solid, casting long shadows across the sand. The boats unload their cargo, and the stones are manhandled onto sledges, ready for their journey overland. You wonder how many stones it takes to build a pyramid. The answer, as always, is more than anyone wants to count. You sigh, adjusting your cloak, and realize that today, like every day, the river will carry more than just stones and people. It will carry stories, stories of triumph and failure, of ambition and exhaustion, stories of men who row until their hands bleed, and of the overseers who insist that the schedule must be kept, no matter what. As you watch another boat slip past, dangerously low in the water, you remind yourself that the Nile is the original conveyor belt. Without it, none of this would be possible. Without it, perhaps you could have stayed home, far from the mud and the flies and the endless, endless stones. But here you are, and the boats keep coming. You watch the morning mist begin to scatter, replaced by the unmistakable aroma of something baking, if you can call it that. The Nile's banks are no place for a grand feast, but necessity is the mother of invention, and hunger is the strictest overseer of all. You drift closer to a knot of workers squatting in the sand, each clutching a chunk of coarse bread as if it is a treasure rather than yesterday's leftovers. Breakfast in ancient Egypt is nothing to inspire envy. The typical meal for those about to break their backs in the shadow of the pyramids is simple, unremarkable, and, let us be honest, relentlessly repetitive. Flat loaves of emmer wheat, roughly ground and even more roughly baked, make up the bulk of the meal. The bread is dense, with the occasional crunch of sand or grit. You try not to imagine how much sand you have already swallowed in your lifetime. The Nile brings life, yes, but it brings a generous helping of dirt with every flood. Beside the bread is a heap of onions, their skins still streaked with earth, their smell sharp enough to make you blink. Onions are not a delicacy. They are medicine, flavor, and a desperate attempt at variety, all at once. One of the men beside you is already tearing an onion apart with his teeth, eyes watering. You are fairly certain the tears are more from flavor than emotion. Someone jokes that if the pyramids ever fall, it will be because of the collective breath of 1,000 onion eating laborers. And then there is the beer. Forget your modern ideas of beer, with its fizz and its cheerful clinking glasses. This is not a drink, it is a meal in liquid form. A thick, cloudy slurry brewed from barley, sometimes laced with a hint of date for those rare celebratory mornings. You take a sip because there is nothing else to drink except the muddy Nile itself, and immediately remember why no one drinks this for pleasure. The taste is sour, the texture bordering on porridge, and yet, miraculously, it does the job. The calories are what matter, not the flavor. You smile wryly, thinking how future generations will romanticize Egyptian beer, never having to actually taste it. Breakfast is not just about eating, though. It is a ritual, a moment of shared misery that bonds the workers. There is a gruff camaraderie in the way bread is torn and passed around, in the muttered curses when someone finds a particularly crunchy bit. It is the only time of day when the supervisors are silent, chewing just as grimly as everyone else, momentarily equals before the day's hierarchy reasserts itself. You catch snippets of conversation as you gnaw on your own portion. Someone complains about a stone that fell and nearly crushed his foot. Another brags, not very convincingly, about the time he outran a crocodile. There are jokes about the overseer's bald head, whispered just quietly enough to avoid another day in the sun as punishment. For these few minutes before the first shouted orders, there is a sense of ordinary life, a reminder that even those building wonders are just people, hungry and a little bit hopeful, before the sun and the work turn them back into shadows among the stones. The meager fare is washed down with more beer, and then with a handful of water scooped from a clay jar, always warm, always slightly muddy. There is talk of the day ahead, which blocks are due for transport, which ramp is rumored to be collapsing, which worker mysteriously vanished overnight. You pretend not to notice the last bit. Disappearances are not uncommon. Life is hard, and the Nile is wide. Someone passes around a handful of dried fish, a rare treat. The taste is overwhelmingly salty, and you suspect it is more bone than flesh. Still, everyone chews with grim satisfaction. No one wastes food here. Hunger is a shadow at your back, never more than a missed meal away from becoming real. As the last crumbs are brushed away and the empty jars are tossed aside, you stand and stretch, feeling the ache already creeping into your shoulders. The sun is fully up now, the golden light making the pyramids seem both nearer and impossibly far. You glance back at the river, where another barge is just docking, more stones waiting for the slow parade to the construction site. You wonder, as you do every morning, why no one has invented something better to eat. Surely, you muse, even the gods would tire of endless bread, onions, and sour beer. But then you remember, the gods are not the ones hauling stones. Breakfast is over, and there is no time to linger. The overseers are stirring, voices rising above the gentle sounds of the river. The day's labor is about to begin in earnest. You take one last, resigned bite of bread, brushing the sand from your tongue. You know you will taste it all day. The pyramids, for all their glory, will never tell anyone about the onion tears, the bitter beer, or the morning hunger. But you know, and as you walk toward the rising sun, the story of the builder's breakfast settles like dust at your feet, unnoticed, uncelebrated, but as much a part of history as any stone set in place. As the last scraps of breakfast disappear and the workers shift uneasily from foot to foot, the mood changes. The gentle murmurs and joking die away, replaced by the sharp bark of orders echoing from a figure who strides through the crowd with all the subtlety of a crocodile on market day. You watch as the overseer, a man whose eyebrows seem permanently furrowed into a single line of suspicion, plants himself at the center of the morning assembly. The ancient Egyptians may not have invented the concept of the middle manager, but by the gods, they perfected it. You see him taking names off a list, though you wonder how many are real and how many were simply invented to explain away missing laborers. The workers are divided into teams, each with its own leader, known as a foreman, whose chief talent appears to be shouting louder than the rest and remembering who is due for a beating. The foremen shout the day's assignments. Some men are ordered to drag stones, others to mix mortar, a few unlucky souls to spend hours sharpening copper tools that will blunt again before midday. There is a hierarchy to all this, as rigid and ancient as the pyramids themselves. At the top, the overseers, their robes a little cleaner and their hands suspiciously soft. Below them, the scribes, keepers of the all-powerful lists, their reed pens as mighty as any whip. Below them, the skilled workers, masons, carpenters, and tool makers who have learned that a single mistake can mean the difference between advancement and an unmarked grave. At the bottom, the unskilled laborers who supply the muscle and receive, in exchange, the least amount of food and the most amount of blame. There is no illusion of equality. Promotions are rare, demotions common, and your career prospects are measured in the width of your calluses. You remember when you first arrived here, clutching your work token and staring wide-eyed at the bustle of the construction site. It took exactly 2 days to realize that advancement was less about skill and more about not being noticed by the overseer on a bad day. Every team is accountable not just for its progress, but for its discipline. Infractions, be they laziness, insubordination, or simply bad luck, are recorded by the ever watchful scribes. The punishments are immediate and memorable. A man who slacks off spends the day in the sun with a heavy stone on his back as a warning to others. A careless worker who drops a block may find himself reassigned to canal dredging, which, as everyone knows, is less a job and more a slow motion drowning. You overhear a group of workers grumbling about their lot. One of them, a wiry man with scars on his forearms, whispers that the overseer was once caught stealing temple bread, but the priest let him go in exchange for his loyalty. Another jokes that the gods created overseers to remind mortals that life is short and mostly unpleasant. Even the scribes are not immune from mockery. There are stories that they cannot sleep unless surrounded by papyrus scrolls. Despite the iron discipline, there is a kind of logic to this organization. The pyramids are not built by brute strength alone, but by a relentless system of accountability, record keeping, and fear. Every stone set in place is first counted, marked, and assigned to a particular team. When a block goes missing, a scribe's face turns pale, and the overseer's voice becomes dangerously calm. Who is responsible? He asks, as if the Nile itself might answer. You notice that the workers are split into groups of roughly 20, each group known as a file. Within each file, there is a subtle pecking order, enforced as much by tradition as by the overseer's whip. Some families have been masons for generations, their sons apprenticed before they have all their teeth. Others are newcomers, conscripted from villages that owed a little too much grain to the temple this year. It is not all cruelty, though. There is a strange pride in being assigned to pyramid work. Even as the overseers scowl and the scribes grumble about missing tablets, the laborers boast quietly of their part in something greater than themselves. After all, a pyramid is more than a tomb. It is a promise to the future, a monument to the stubbornness of the living and the vanity of the dead. You watch as the teams fan out across the site, each man aware of the day's impossible task and the very real consequences of failure. The overseers circle like hawks, their voices cutting through the morning air. The scribes hover at the edges, ready to record every triumph and every mistake. There is no applause, no reward for diligence, only the knowledge that, for another day, you are still part of the great project, not yet lost to the sand. In a strange, backward way, you feel grateful. In a world where the Nile can wash away your crops and crocodiles can end your career with a single misstep, at least the rules here are clear. Work hard, stay invisible, and pray that the overseer's anger finds someone else today. As the sun rises higher, the foreman's shouts grow sharper. The day's labor has officially begun. You shoulder your load, merging into the slow, inevitable march toward the pyramids, toward an immortality, or at least toward lunchtime. You can almost hear the gods laughing. It is easy, from the banks of the Nile, to let your gaze drift toward the pyramids and forget where all that stone comes from. But as your feet are pointed toward another day of labor, your mind wanders backward to the beginning of every block's journey in the hellish realm of the ancient quarries. You imagine the world at the quarry. Here, the sun is sharper, the air full of choking dust. The cries of men echo off sheer walls of limestone and granite, mixing with the endless clatter of hammers. The work starts before sunrise, when the heat is less murderous, but the darkness is full of unseen hazards, scorpions under rocks, snakes in the shadows, and the possibility that someone will not see another dawn. The stones that become the skin and bones of the pyramids are not chosen for their beauty, but for their endurance. Limestone for the core, rough and pitted, finer white limestone for the outer casing, almost luminous in the morning light, granite for the most sacred chambers, impossibly hard and unwilling to yield to anything but the slow, brutal rhythm of copper, chisels, and stone hammers. As everyone knows, that the real pyramids are born not in the desert, but in these pits, gouged deep into the landscape, where men break themselves so the stones can be whole. You have heard the tales, some whispered, some shouted, of what happens in the quarries. Men vanish into clouds of dust, reappearing days later with bloodied hands and the vacant eyes of those who have spent too much time underground. Injuries are common: smashed fingers, broken toes, lungs filled with grit. Sometimes a section of quarry wall will collapse without warning, burying workers alive. Their names are crossed off lists, and the next group is sent in to finish the job. No one mourns too loudly. Everyone is a little too aware that luck is a thin shield, and the gods rarely intervene on behalf of the clumsy. There are rituals, of course. Each morning, before the first blow falls, a small offering is left: bread, beer, maybe a handful of dates if someone has been especially fortunate. The gods of the earth must be appeased, or so the foreman insists. Most men, you suspect, simply hope the offering buys a little more luck for the day. The tools are primitive, bordering on cruel. Copper chisels dull in minutes and must be sharpened endlessly by another unlucky team. Wooden wedges, hammered into cracks and soaked with water, sometimes split stone, sometimes splinter into uselessness. Sledgehammers swing in tired hands, raising bruises and blisters in equal measure. There is a rhythm to the work: strike, wedge, lever, rest, and beneath it all, the constant knowledge that any miscalculation could bring down a wall or a reprimand, whichever is more dangerous that day. You wonder how anyone survives. The answer, it seems, is that not everyone does. There are stories, always spoken in low voices, about the bad pits, the ones that swallow men whole. Sometimes a body is never found. Sometimes only a tattered scrap of linen or a tool is left behind, a warning for the next shift. Yet still, men come. The promise of food, of pay, and the faint hope of escaping the farm or the debt that landed them here is enough to keep the quarries full. Occasionally, a supervisor will arrive from the construction site, surveying the progress with an air of disinterest. Faster, he will say, as if speed can outmatch geology. The workers pretend to listen, their thoughts drifting elsewhere, toward home, toward the Nile, toward the impossible weight of the next block. When a block is finally freed, there is a moment of triumph, quickly swallowed by the realization that the work has only begun. Ropes are looped around the stone. Men grunt and curse as they coax it onto a sled. The path from the quarry to the river is a gauntlet: up ramps, down rutted tracks, across fields baked to a cruel hardness by the sun. Each sledge leaves scars in the earth that will last for years. Sometimes the block slips, crushing toes or worse, and the day's progress is measured in the distance. The stone has moved, not the number of men still standing. You have seen the aftermath, men stumbling back from the quarries, their faces smeared with dust and blood, their arms trembling from the effort. The pay is not enough. It never is. The stories they tell are not of heroism, but of endurance, of making it through another day without being lost to the rock. The pyramids, you realize, are not just a monument to kings or gods. They are a monument to pain, to patience, and to the quiet, stubborn refusal to give in. Each block is a history written in bruises and sweat, an unmarked gravestone for the men who vanished along the way. Tomorrow, more will go to the quarries. More blocks will be wrenched from the earth. And you, standing by the river, will watch as those stones begin their next journey, silent, indifferent, and far heavier than they appear. As the sun rises over the Nile, you remind yourself that every stone has a story, even if no one bothers to remember the names of the storytellers. You leave the imaginary dust of the quarries behind, only to find yourself drawn into the daily spectacle of moving the stones from the Nile's edge to the base of the unfinished pyramids. This is where the true genius of Egyptian logistics plays out, a performance less about engineering and more about raw determination and improvisation. You join the procession, the air thick with shouts, sweat, and the slow, grinding scrape of stone on wood. The blocks, newly arrived from the quarries, rest heavily on the bank, indifferent to their fate. You eye the teams assembling around each one, dozens of men with rough hands and tired backs, each clutching a length of rope or a heavy lever. There are no wheels to be found. Wheels, after all, are for sensible people on roads, not for visionaries determined to drag mountains across sand and mud. Instead, the ancient Egyptians have embraced the humble wooden roller, logs, cut to size and rolled beneath the sledges that carry each block. The logs splinter, crack, and are quickly replaced. No one bothers to mourn a roller lost to the cause. Every morning, you watch the same ritual unfold. A foreman surveys the route, a path lined with mud and straw, kept damp by teams of boys carrying jars from the Nile. The purpose is clear. Wet sand slides better than dry, a fact learned from bitter experience and many lost stones. You wonder who first discovered this and whether he survived to see the results. Probably not, you decide. Innovation is rarely rewarded on ancient building sites. The block is lifted onto a wooden sledge, and the men brace themselves, ropes looped over their shoulders, faces set in grim concentration. At a shouted command, the whole line leans forward, and the block shudders into reluctant motion. The sledge grinds across the rollers, leaving deep ruts in the sand, the men chanting in time to their movements, a crude, relentless song that makes the work just barely tolerable. There is a peculiar sort of choreography to the process. As the sledge moves forward, the rollers at the back are picked up and rushed to the front, laid down again with practiced speed. The scene is a ceaseless cycle of hope and disappointment. Sometimes the stone glides smoothly, Sometimes it refuses to budge, as if protesting its own part in this grand absurdity. You watch as foremen shout encouragement or threats, while the youngest workers scurry back and forth, water sloshing from their jars, desperately trying to keep the sand slick enough to avoid disaster. Inevitably, something goes wrong. A roller splits, a rope frays and snaps, sending the sledge lurching to one side. Shouts erupt. Curses in a dozen dialects rise over the groaning stone. The work pauses as new ropes are fetched, and a team of bruised, sweating men wedge the sledge back on course. You marvel, in your ironic way, at how the Egyptians have achieved the world's greatest building project without ever inventing the thing most suited for it, the wheel. Perhaps wheels, like dignity, are for those not burdened by the ambitions of kings. The distance from river to pyramid is not far in theory, but in practice, it might as well be the journey of a lifetime. Each block weighs as much as a small house. Every step forward is hard won, measured in blisters, bruises, and curses. Occasionally, an overseer will stride along the route, waving a stick and making notes on a scrap of papyrus. You have no idea what he writes, perhaps a running tally of curses per meter, or perhaps just a list of men to blame when the inevitable mishap occurs. Despite the chaos, there is a strange kind of efficiency to the process. No one is idle for long. The work never quite stops, even when disaster strikes. When a block finally arrives at the base of the pyramid, the men collapse beside it, gasping for breath and grinning through cracked lips. There is no applause, only the knowledge that for one brief moment they have won a victory against the unyielding stone. You cannot help but compare this spectacle to the imagined future. Perhaps, in another era, someone will devise a machine to do this work, powered by steam or magic or ambition unchecked by common sense. Until then, the only engines here are human backs and stubbornness, fueled by bread, onions, and that peculiar variety of beer that tastes of wet straw and regret. Later, when the sun is high and the shadow of the pyramid shortens, the process begins anew. More stones arrive at the river. More sledges are prepared. The rollers, battered but unbroken, are lined up once again. The work continues, hour after hour, day after day, year after year. You watch all this and think, logistics is a word that means the art of making the impossible just barely possible most of the time. If only the Pharaoh could see the spectacle of men and wood and stone struggling through the muck, perhaps he would settle for a smaller tomb. But the pyramids, like their builders, do not know how to quit. You sigh, brush the grit from your eyes, and step aside as another sledge rumbles past, heading toward the immortality, one roller at a time. You think perhaps there is something inherently perverse about human beings. The more difficult a task becomes, the more determined everyone seems to be to see it through. Dragging blocks from the Nile to the pyramid's base is a feat in itself, but as you gaze at the rising structure, you realize that the most grueling ordeal is yet to come. Gravity, which has never been a friend to the ancient Egyptian builder, becomes a cruel tyrant the higher you climb. As you join the throng inching toward the construction site, the pyramid seems almost to taunt you. Its shadow stretches far across the sand, lengthening as the sun climbs, as if reminding you just how far there is to go. Already, the lower levels are a mosaic of massive blocks, each fitted with maddening precision. Above them, ramps of mud brick and limestone wind upward in an ungainly spiral. Scaffolds creak under the weight of workers, and shouts echo across the growing monument. The ramps are marvels in their own right. There are straight ramps, zigzag ramps, spiral ramps. The debate over the best ramp style has consumed more man hours than the building itself. You've heard the arguments. Some say the ramps must be steep to save space. Others insist on gentle slopes for safety, and a few propose outlandish spirals that wrap the pyramid like a snake preparing to crush its prey. None of the options are good for your back. Every morning, as you trudge upward, you wonder why the gods did not think to provide elevators along with the gift of civilization. Getting a block from the ground to its resting place near the top is an exercise in collective stubbornness. The sledges are dragged up the ramps with yet more ropes and ever more desperate shouting. It's a slow, miserable ascent, punctuated by slips, stumbles, and the occasional collapse of a ramp section, usually at the worst possible moment. You remember the look of horror that flickers across every worker's face when a sledge starts to slide backward, gaining momentum like an angry ox. Some scramble to the sides, others dig in their heels as if bare feet and hope alone could stop several tons of stone. Disaster is never far away. Just yesterday, a team lost control of a block halfway up the ramp, and you watched as it skidded downward, scattering men and splinters in its wake before coming to a rest in a cloud of dust. The aftermath was a study in ancient workplace safety, shouted threats, frantic counting of heads, and a flurry of scribes recording the incident, likely to be ignored until the next block repeats the drama. There are no safety rails, no warning signs, no compensation except the rare, awkward silence of a foreman forced to look concerned, yet the work continues. There is a kind of grim pride among the workers, the sense that each new row of blocks marks another victory over the impossible. You overhear their banter, delivered with the dark humor of those who know too well what's at stake. If the gods wanted these stones higher, they'd have wings, one mutters, another adds. Or perhaps the gods want to see how many of us they can send to the afterlife before the king gets his tomb. The masons are the unsung artists in this grim ballet. Their job is to fit each block as tightly as possible, a feat that requires endless patience and nerves of steel. They chip away at the stone, checking and rechecking, mindful that even the slightest error can destabilize the entire structure. Perfection is demanded, and mistakes are not just embarrassing, they are dangerous. The tale of the crooked corner is still whispered about a team that misaligned an entire row and had to tear down a day's work while the overseers raged. Some say the foreman responsible is still looking for honest work, though no one can remember his name. It is not only the stone that rises. As the pyramid climbs, so does the hierarchy. The higher the level, the more skilled and nervous the workers required. To be chosen for upper level work is a dubious honor. The view is spectacular, but the risks are greater and the sun is relentless. Still, the lure of status and the hope of a better ration of beer keeps the queue long. You marvel sometimes at the sheer persistence of it all. For every stone that is laid, another waits at the bottom, and another behind that, and another behind that. There are rumors, past in tired voices, during rare moments of rest, that the work will never end, that when this pyramid is finished, another will begin, and another, until the Nile itself runs dry, or the pharaohs finally get bored. By sunset, the ramps are shadows, and the pyramid's peak catches the last light like a golden dagger in the sky. You know tomorrow will bring more stones, more accidents, more arguments about ramps and schedules, and whose fault it is that the king's tomb is not yet complete. But for now, you stand on the scaffolding, brush stone dust from your hair, and allow yourself the smallest flicker of pride. You have helped raise something that defies reason, pain, and gravity itself. Whether anyone remembers your name is another matter, and as you descend, knees aching and throat dry, you hear the whispers, true or not, that these monuments grow from the bones of the builders, that each new layer buries another forgotten soul. You try not to think about it as you trudge back toward the river, but the thought lingers in the dusk, heavy as the stones you move. After hours spent beneath the relentless sun and the watchful gaze of overseers, you begin to crave escape, even for a moment. That is how you find yourself slipping away from the clamor of the ramps and stones and wandering toward the bustling market that springs up every day near the pyramid site, a ragtag collection of stalls, shouting vendors, opportunists, and hopefuls. Here, for a precious hour, you can almost forget the endless dust and the ache in your bones. Almost. The market is less a place than a living organism. It sprawls along the edge of the workers' village, growing and shifting as new faces appear and old ones vanish, drawn by the ever-changing tide of needs and dreams. Under awnings of woven reed and patched linen, traders hawk their wares, piles of rough bread, onions, always onions, garlic so pungent it seems to peel paint from the air, and baskets of dried fish that glisten with a faint, suspicious sheen. You pick your way through, eyeing the goods with the practiced suspicion of someone who knows that fresh is more often a promise than a fact. There are more exotic items too, if your definition of exotic is generous enough. Amulets shaped like cats and crocodiles, carved from soapstone or battered bronze, are offered as protection against everything from snakebite to curses. A scribe sells ink made from crushed soot, wrapped in papyrus that was probably stolen from the temple. There are tiny jars of ointment with claims as grand as the pharaoh's dreams, guaranteed to soothe burns, bruises, broken hearts, and, on a good day, heal a stubbed toe. You suspect the only magic in them is the price. Mixed among the traders are those who survive by less honest means. You see a group of children darting between stalls, their fingers quick and their eyes quicker, snatching whatever they can from distracted buyers. A toothless old man with a sack offers lucky stones, which look suspiciously like debris from the construction site. There is always someone muttering about the latest scam: counterfeit amulets, watered down beer, bread bulked out with sand. The black market thrives here, a shadowy twin to the official bazaar, catering to the workers' needs, both real and imagined. Not everyone in the market is selling. Some simply exist, hoping for a scrap or a handout, a few coins, or a crust of bread. You see beggars crouched in the shade, their faces drawn, their voices hoarse from pleading. One woman clutches a thin child to her breast, eyes scanning the crowd for a familiar face or an open heart. Another, legs twisted by disease, drags himself from stall to stall, offering a blessing in exchange for a morsel. You watch as a group of children, too young to work but too hungry to play, circle a fishmonger's stall, waiting for discarded heads and tails. Yet even here, in the margins, life persists. Laughter bubbles up as a trader's donkey makes a bid for freedom, scattering onions and curses in equal measure. Two laborers, having been paid at last, swagger through the crowd, boasting loudly of their riches and buying rounds of weak beer for anyone who will listen to their tales. In the shade of a fig tree, a group of old women exchange gossip and warnings. Which overseer has the worst temper? Which ramps are most likely to collapse? Whose daughter has caught the eye of a scribe? You realize, watching the ebb and flow, that the market is a kind of safety valve for the whole construction project. Here, grudges are aired, bargains struck, rumors traded for a cup of barley beer. For all the harshness of the work, there is a strange equality in this place. The masons and the haulers, the traders and the thieves, the hungry and the hopeful, all share the same space for a little while. Of course, the shadow of the pyramid never quite leaves. The closer you get to the heart of the market, the more you notice how every trade and transaction is shaped by the demands of the great project. Prices fluctuate with the state of the work. If a ramp collapses, bread becomes scarce as workers are forced to dig out the mess instead of tending the ovens. If a shipment of fish arrives late, tempers rise and the first fists follow soon after. Even the gods seem to hover at the edges. A priest stands by a stall, offering blessings and thinly veiled threats in exchange for alms. Sometimes, you think, the true story of the pyramids is not just in the stones, but in these moments, the arguments over onions, the quiet acts of charity, the scams that somehow never go out of style. If the pharaoh's tomb is ever finished, it will be the traders and beggars, the cooks and gossips, who remember what it was really like to live in the shadow of immortality. You buy a crust of bread, resisting the urge to ask whether it contains more grain or sand, and wander toward the edge of the crowd. A child brushes past, eyes bright, slipping a pebble into your hand with a practiced wink. "Good luck," she whispers. "1 copper, just for you." You hand her a broken shell in return. Here, everything is a trade, even hope. As the sun starts to dip, the market begins to thin. The overseers will soon return, their voices chasing everyone back to work, and the brief illusion of freedom will fade. Still, for a few moments, you allow yourself to savor the taste of something other than toil, the noisy, messy, entirely human life that thrums alongside the endless stones. You look back once more at the pyramid, catching a glimpse of the golden light on its upper stones. You wonder, not for the first time, if anyone will remember the market stalls and the laughter, the scams and the generosity, when all that remains is stone and silence. But you know, deep down, that history never remembers the market. Only those who survive it do. As the last echoes of market chatter fade, and the sun climbs toward its unforgiving zenith, you are drawn back toward the construction site by a different kind of noise. The low, rhythmic chant of priests gathering at the edge of the workforce. Religion, you are forced to admit, is as inescapable here as dust or debt. If the stones are the bones of the pyramids, then faith is the mortar, holding together a world that often seems one mistake away from collapse. You watch as a procession winds through the crowd, a cluster of priests, their shaved heads gleaming, their white robes miraculously unstained by mud or sweat. They carry incense burners and figurines, bits of sacred text on linen scrolls, and baskets filled with offerings, bread, beer, onions, and sometimes, on lucky days, honey or a scattering of dried figs. At their center is the high priest, who manages to look both bored and supremely important, a feat you suspect comes with years of practice. The workers slow their pace, heads bowed or turned away, uncertain whether to hope for a blessing or fear a new curse. The priests are here to perform the rituals that supposedly keep disaster at bay, a cosmic insurance policy, paid not in coins, but in prayers and sacrifices. Today, a goat is led forward, its fate sealed by the fact that it failed to look sufficiently holy or sufficiently fast. You try not to meet its eyes as the blade flashes and the chanting rises, a sound that seems to reach all the way to the half-built pyramid and back. You have never been sure whether the rituals actually work. There are those who swear by them, who believe that every stone set in place without incident is proof of divine favor. Others are less convinced. You have seen ramps collapse minutes after a blessing, stones split despite being anointed with sacred oil, and men struck down by illness while still clutching their amulets. The gods, it seems, have a sense of humor as dark as any overseers. The priests move through the ranks, splashing water, burning incense, muttering invocations to every god imaginable: Osiris, guardian of the afterlife; Isis, mother and healer; Horus, the all-seeing falcon; Thoth, master of scribes. The list is endless, each name another layer of protection, just in case one god is napping or distracted by more interesting prayers. The workers receive their blessings with a mixture of hope and skepticism, some clutching at charms, others hiding snickers behind calloused hands. You marvel at how thoroughly religion seeps into every corner of life here. The very structure of the pyramid is a kind of cosmic diagram designed to align with the stars, to channel the king's spirit into eternity. The precise orientation, the sacred numbers of blocks, the careful placement of chambers, all dictated by priests who claim to read the will of the gods in patterns of sand and feathers. A single error, they warn, could doom the pharaoh's soul to wander forever, an unpleasant prospect for him and a disaster for everyone else. Yet, for all the solemnity, there is a sense of routine to it all. The same prayers, the same gestures, the same promises of protection and prosperity, if only the right offerings are made. You suspect the gods are as weary of repetition as you are, but habit is a powerful force. Even the priests seem more concerned with maintaining their place in the hierarchy than with the fate of the pharaoh's soul. You catch one eyeing a fresh loaf of bread with undisguised hunger, another pocketing an onion with a practiced flick of the wrist. Sometimes religion on the work site is less about ceremony and more about control. The overseers stand nearby, watching the proceedings with a shrewd eye, ready to invoke divine wrath at the first sign of disobedience. The gods are watching, they remind everyone, their tone suggesting that so are they. A threat wrapped in a prayer is still a threat. You recall tales of workers punished for blasphemy, though the definition is as flexible as an overseer's temper. Still, there is comfort to be found in ritual, even for the cynical. You see it in the way workers cross themselves before a dangerous lift, in the amulets sewn into every scrap of clothing, in the whispered prayers that drift through the night. Faith, like bread, is never in abundance, but it is always shared. As the goat's blood darkens the sand and the incense smoke curls upward, you find yourself muttering a half-hearted prayer to any god willing to listen. That today's work will be uneventful, that the stones will hold, that you will return to your bed with all your fingers and toes intact. You are not sure if it helps, but you do it anyway. Some habits are older than the pyramids themselves. The priests finish their rounds, gathering up offerings and stragglers, leaving behind the faint promise of protection and the very real smell of blood and smoke. The overseers nod in satisfaction, the workers trudge back to their places, and the endless labor resumes, now blessed for whatever that is worth. You glance up at the sun, squinting through the haze. Somewhere above you, the pharaoh's soul waits for his pyramid. Down here, you just hope the gods have a soft spot for those who build, not just for those who rule. And as the chanting fades into the clatter of stones, you wonder, not for the first time, whether eternity is really worth all this trouble. You are tracing a path around the base of the pyramid, eyes searching for a patch of shade, when you notice a young mason crouched by a pale block, scratching away with a bit of copper. At first, you think he is fixing a flaw, but as you draw closer, you realize he is leaving his mark, a spidery cluster of symbols, personal and defiant, tucked just below the edge where the next row of stone will soon hide it from the world. It is not an isolated act. Once you start looking, you see graffiti everywhere, on the backs of blocks, under the ramps, inside the half-built chambers. They are the hidden voices of those who do the heavy lifting, the only way a worker's name will ever come close to immortality. Some are crude. Mena was here. Others are prayers, pleas for protection, or for an easier shift tomorrow. You even spot a sketch of an overseer with donkey ears, forever immortalized in a place he will hopefully never find. The scribes and feasts may claim the pyramids belong to the pharaoh, but the walls tell a different story. There are tally marks tracking the days worked, miniature figures marching in endless lines, sometimes accompanied by pointed comments on the speed or slowness of the construction. You grin at a bit of hieroglyphic wit. If you are reading this, you are not hauling stone, scratched deep enough to outlast most careers. In rare, lucky cases, entire crew names are recorded. The gangs of workers organize themselves into proud units with names both boastful and grim. You stumble upon the drunkards of Menkaura, scrawled with pride, and a slightly faded the friends of Khufu. For these men, this is the only monument that will ever bear their legacy. Their actual lives may vanish like footprints in the sand, but for now, their names linger in the dust and mortar, half joke, half memorial. Not all inscriptions are so playful. You run your fingers over prayers to gods you barely recognize, petitions for loved ones left behind, for relief from fever or safe passage across the river. Sometimes the graffiti becomes a confessional. I stole bread. May Anubis forgive me. Or a whispered threat. May the next stone fall on my overseer's foot. A few are simply lists, names, debts, complaints, as if writing them down might lighten the load, if only by a feather. There are even fragments of what you might call ancient memes, sketched animals with oversized features, boats crewed by stick figures, the unmistakable image of a cat knocking over a jar. You realize, with a kind of weary affection, that humor is as old as hardship. A joke carved in stone is an act of rebellion, a reminder that the people who build wonders are not machines, but men and women with sharp tongues and sharper senses of irony. The official inscriptions, of course, are another matter entirely. At the entrance to the temple and the future burial chambers, the walls are lined with precisely chiseled hieroglyphs, each stroke blessed and overseen by scribes with a zeal matched only by their love of rules. These carvings promise eternity to the king, recounting victories and divine favor in language as polished as the limestone itself. But these, are stories for the future, not the present. They speak only of triumph, never of struggle. You watch a scribe at work, painstakingly correcting a single symbol for the fifth time. His hands tremble with the knowledge that one mistake could mean a lifetime of shame or worse. He does not joke, does not sketch, does not daydream. His job is to carve certainty into stone. You wonder if he envies the laborers with their hidden messages and careless jokes. Some evenings, after the overseers have withdrawn and the site quiets, you see workers return to their favorite walls. They light small lamps, shield their scratching from prying eyes, and add another line to the secret record. Some of these men are illiterate, but that does not stop them. Their marks are simple: crosses, spirals, rough shapes, but each is a declaration. I was here, I lived, I mattered, if only for a day. You wonder if the king will ever know how much of his monument is built on these fleeting hopes and stubborn laughs. You doubt it. The pharaoh's name may outlast the world, but it is these half hidden stories that give the stones their soul. In 1,000 years, when the sand has swallowed the markets and the ramps have rotted away, someone might stumble upon a scratched name or a crude drawing and wonder who stood here, chisel in hand, under the same blazing sun. And if they are wise, they will understand. History is not just the tale of the mighty, but also of those who leave their mark in the shadows, in the hope that someone, anyone, will one day remember. As you step away, the young mason glances up and grins, his secret safe for now. You nod in silent agreement and continue on, feeling the pyramid at your back, heavy with the weight of 1,000 forgotten voices, all clamoring, even now, for just a little piece of eternity. It is a rare morning when the sun does not find at least one worker doubled over with pain, a second limping along with a makeshift crutch, and a third sporting a bandaged hand or foot, the linen already stiff with blood or pus. As you return from another circuit around the pyramid, you notice the line forming outside a small, shadowy tent at the edge of the work site, a sight as familiar as the sunrise and just as inevitable. Here sits the medic, healer, or, depending on who you ask, the closest thing to a miracle worker this side of the Nile. You join the queue, not because you are wounded, not today at least, but because you have learned that every construction project is also a breeding ground for disease, disaster, and every ailment the human body can invent. There is an unspoken competition among the men who has the worst injury, the nastiest infection, the most grotesque swelling. Bragging rights go to the survivor, while the truly unlucky disappear quietly, becoming another rumor for the campfire. The medic, or SWW as the ancient Egyptians call him, is a figure both respected and feared. Wrapped in linen, armed with a battered box of ointments and tools, he dispenses advice with the authority of a priest and the bedside manner of a crocodile. You have seen him pull thorns from feet, set broken bones with a brutal efficiency, and stitch wounds using needles that look better suited for sewing sails than skin. If you are lucky, he will offer you a poultice of honey and herbs, swearing it will keep away the evil wind. If you are less lucky, he will suggest a prayer to Sekhmet, goddess of plague and healing, and move on to the next patient. There is no shortage of work. Stone dust fills lungs with every breath, and the relentless sun boils fever into the bones. You see a young man cradling a swollen arm, his skin streaked with angry red lines, an old laborer coughing up blood, eyes hollow, but still stubbornly present. A woman with burns on her hands from an unlucky brush with hot resin. There are those who come with the invisible wounds of sleeplessness, haunted by dreams of collapsing walls and falling stones. For each, the SSW offers the same: a sharp look, a muttered diagnosis, and a recipe from the tattered book of healing that may involve garlic, crocodile dung, or simply hope. Ancient Egyptian medicine, you learn, is a mix of genuine insight and utter madness. Some remedies are surprisingly effective. Honey does, after all, keep wounds clean, and willow bark eases pain. Other treatments seem more like tests of faith than science. The medic prescribes spells written on papyrus, tied to the patient's arm with a strip of reed. He blows smoke over the sick, buries figurines in the sand, and mutters the names of demons for hours. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the patient simply gets better, and the SWMW claims credit. Infections are the great enemy. Even a small cut can turn deadly, the flesh darkening, the fever rising, until the only remedy is a quiet corner and a hasty prayer. You see how the medics struggle, washing wounds with beer, bandaging with linen, trying to keep the flies away. They fight a losing battle, but they fight it all the same. You find a strange comfort in their grim determination, their refusal to give up even when the outcome is written in the sweat and shivers of the dying. For the truly unlucky, there is always the temple. The priests of Sekhmet and Isis run their own infirmaries, places of ritual and mystery, where the line between medicine and magic blurs to nothing. Some workers disappear into these sanctuaries, returning days later with amulets, shaved heads, and stories of visions that you suspect are more fever than divine intervention. Others never return at all, their fate left to the care of the gods and the gossip of the market. You are told over and over that even the Pharaoh himself is not immune. Kings and queens fall sick, break bones, suffer sunstroke and plague. Their doctors, of course, are more lavishly paid and less inclined to admit failure. But you hear the rumors that the great tombs were built as much to ward off death as to celebrate life, that the rituals and remedies are desperate bargains with forces no one truly understands. You watch as the line at the medic's tent dwindles, the healed and the hopeful limping back to their duties, the unlucky making their way toward the river's edge. There are no pensions, no compensation for injury, only the promise of a few days' lighter labor, or more likely, the certainty of being replaced. Still, you catch a flicker of pride in the eyes of those who return to work, battered but not yet broken. Survival here is its own kind of triumph. As you leave, you offer a silent thanks to the gods, not for health, which is always temporary, but for another day with your feet beneath you and your breath in your chest. You know tomorrow will bring more wounds, more fevers, more visits to the SOW. But for now, you walk away, grateful for the stubborn persistence of those who mend and heal in the shadow of so much unfinished stone. And you think, not for the first time, that the true miracle of the pyramids is not that they still stand, but that anyone survived building them at all. It would be easy, standing beneath the gaze of stern overseers and the blinding light of the pyramids, to believe this is a world built and run by men alone. Every story is about muscle, sweat, sunburn, and laborers dragging blocks. But if you turn from the shouting and dust, if you follow the smaller, softer currents flowing alongside the river of work, you will discover a second, quieter world, the world of women and children, largely invisible but utterly indispensable. You catch sight of them first in the early morning, before the construction site wakes. Women move through the workers' camps with baskets balanced on their hips or heads, baskets of bread, onions, dates, or the rare luxury of a honey cake. They are up before the men, their hands red and rough from kneading dough and hauling water from the river. The phrase, behind every great man is a great woman, is nowhere written in stone, but here it is practiced daily in 100 small acts that make survival possible. These women are more than cooks or water carriers. They are nurses, counselors, and accountants. You watch one negotiating fiercely with a vendor over a batch of fish, her voice sharper than any overseer's shout. Another soothes a crying child on her hip, while her free hand deftly patches a torn tunic. In the cool shadow of a reed shelter, a grandmother tells stories, keeping a restless group of children spellbound with tales of gods and monsters that keep them distracted from their empty stomachs. There is a myth, repeated by men who should know better, that women do not work on the pyramids. In truth, their labor is simply less visible. Some are hired as weavers, making the endless supply of linen for bandages, wrappings, and clothing. Others sort and grind grain, patch baskets, or mend ropes worn thin by the day's hauling. During peak building seasons, when hands are scarce and schedules are threatened, even these invisible boundaries blur. Women help carry water up the ramps or mix mortar in the dust. Children, too, are everywhere if you know where to look. The very young cling to their mothers, while older children dart through the market, running errands, fetching supplies, or chasing chickens. A few lucky ones act as apprentices to carpenters, potters, or even scribes, although you sense that the latter is less about learning and more about running messages and sharpening reeds. For most, childhood is short. As soon as arms are strong enough, boys are handed a rope or a basket, girls a spindle or a bowl. There is no ceremony, no announcement, just a slow, inevitable shift from play to work. Still, children carve out their own moments of rebellion and joy. You see them skipping stones in the Nile at dusk, daring each other to approach the older workers' fires, or inventing games among the stacked blocks. Games that echo the work their parents do, but transformed into laughter for a little while. You hear their giggles as they draw faces on the dusty walls or steal scraps from the market, slipping away before anyone can scold them. In this, at least, they are equal to the men, skilled survivors in a world that rewards cleverness and quick feet. The family unit is both shield and prison. The presence of wives and children keeps the workers tied to the site, their loyalty ensured by bonds far stronger than any rope. For the women, life is a balancing act, supporting husbands and sons, making deals with traders, maintaining peace among neighbors, and navigating the ever present dangers of a world where death is never far away. If a man is injured or killed, it is often his wife who negotiates with the overseers for his meager pay, who must decide whether to stay, remarry, or try to return to her own village. Rumors travel swiftly through the women's network. Who is pregnant? Who has fallen ill? Which child ran a fever in the night? They know before the overseers do when food is running low, when the bread is spoiled, or when a market vendor is cheating the workers. They are the unofficial historians, memory keepers, and sometimes the only ones to grieve the men who vanish into the quarries or the river. Sometimes you hear a woman's voice raised in song, soft, soothing, a lullaby for a restless baby, or a prayer for a husband working atop the pyramid. These moments are rare and private, but they thread through the noise and violence like a lifeline. At night, as the fires die down and the stars emerge, the women gather in clusters, sharing news and hopes, the children asleep in their laps. The world of stone and sun pauses, just for a moment, to listen. As you turn away from the main road, you realize how little of this will ever be recorded. The women's hands will never shape a stone that endures for millennia, nor will their names appear on the blocks or in the king's scrolls. But without them, the men's work would collapse by morning. The children will grow, and some may return as workers or traders, forever shaped by memories of the dust and songs that filled these days. You step back into the glare of the building site, feeling the weight of what is seen and unseen. If the Pharaoh could thank anyone, you think, he should thank the ones whose names he will never know, the ones who keep the world moving while the rest are busy building immortality, one stone or one loaf of bread at a time. There is a rumor, persistent as the morning flies, that the greatest danger on the pyramid site is not falling stones, not sunstroke, not even a hidden snake in a basket of onions. No, the real threat, whispered from worker to worker, comes from discipline, the sharpened edge of authority, always hungry for a scapegoat. You begin your day with the uneasy knowledge that, for the ancient Egyptians, order is not merely preferred, but enforced, with a creativity as cold and relentless as the stones themselves. You see it first in the posture of the men, shoulders hunched, eyes lowered, mouths set in careful neutrality whenever the overseer draws near. The overseer is not a brute, at least not always. He is worse. He is an expert in disappointment, a craftsman of threats, a connoisseur of punishment. His staff taps a slow rhythm across the scaffolding, and you know every laborer is counting the beats, hoping to pass unseen and unremarked. The infractions that draw his ire are many and varied. Slowness, for one, a sin against the holy schedule, a stone misplaced by an inch, a ramp left untidy, a tool returned dull or damaged. Disrespect, laziness, theft, real or imagined, or simple bad luck, all are enough to merit attention. The scribe stands close at hand, stylus twitching, ready to record names and offenses in a ledger thicker than any sacred scroll. You once saw a man punished for walking with insufficient purpose, a charge so vague it might as well be a death sentence. When punishment comes, it is swift and public. You recall the first time you saw it, a man accused of stealing a chunk of bread. There was no trial, just the overseer's sneer and the scribe's silent nod. The man was hauled before the crowd, stripped to the waist, and given 20 lashes, each one counted aloud, each one a warning to the rest. You remember the way the crowd looked away, the quick, guilty relief that it was not their turn. The next day, the man was back at work, moving a little slower, his back a map of welts. But there are harsher punishments, too, reserved for greater crimes or for those unlucky enough to become an example. You hear stories, always in low voices, always with a glance over the shoulder, about the canal gangs. Sentenced men forced to dredge silt in stagnant water from dawn till dusk, their bodies fed to the mosquitoes, and their hope drowned in the mud. It is said that no one returns from canal duty unchanged. Some do not return at all. For the truly unlucky, there are tales of execution. You never see it yourself, but everyone knows someone who knows someone, a worker who disappeared after being caught sabotaging a block, a foreman who fell afoul of the priests, a thief left as a warning at the edge of the workers' village, his fate picked clean by scavengers. The desert remembers everything, even if the records do not. There is an official code inscribed somewhere in the temples and recited with grave seriousness by the scribes, the laws of Ma'at, the order of the world. Justice, they claim, is what keeps the chaos at bay, ensures the pyramid rises, and the king's name lives forever. In practice, justice is often the overseer's mood and the scribe's convenience. To protest is to risk being labeled a troublemaker, and there is no appeal once you are on the wrong side of the tally. Not all punishment is physical. Some men are humiliated, made to stand all day with a stone on their back, or to shout their own failings to the crowd. Others are banished from the best rations or given the worst shifts, their names quietly dropped from the rolls of the favored teams. Social death can be as bitter as the real thing. A man who loses his place in the labor file may never recover, condemned to the endless misery of the least respected tasks. You notice the effect this has on everyone. The workers learn to move quickly, to obey without question, to watch each other with wary eyes. No one trusts too deeply, for betrayal is always a possibility. A whispered word to the overseer, a favor traded for a lighter load or a better ration. The market stalls echo with gossip about spies, and more than one fist fight begins with an accusation of informant. Yet there is also, perversely, a kind of pride in surviving the system. The men swap stories of punishments endured and tricks for avoiding the overseer's notice. Some paint their bruises with mud and boast of lashes survived, proof of toughness, if not of innocence. A few even try to turn discipline into dark humor. If you can still count your own scars, you are not working hard enough, or the only promotion here is from bad to worse. At night, around the fire, the stories of cruelty are retold, exaggerated, softened with laughter, passed from mouth to mouth until they become legends. You listen, realizing that, like everything else here, discipline is both a burden and a bond. Those who endure it together are bound by more than rope and stone. You catch the overseer's eye as you walk back to your tent, your posture careful, your thoughts unreadable. He nods just once, as if to remind you that tomorrow is another day, another chance to stumble, another name for his list. You nod in return, thinking that in this place survival is the only reward and obedience is the only guarantee of breakfast. Above you, the pyramids climb higher, indifferent to the small tragedies and triumphs below. In the shadow of stone, discipline is just another tool, cold, efficient, and utterly necessary for keeping chaos at bay. You are not alone in wondering as another punishing day fades into the long Egyptian twilight what all this effort is for. It is a question no one dares ask the overseers or the priests. Yet as you sit among your fellow workers, your backs pressed against the cooling stone, the stories begin to surface, stories as old as the river itself, riddles and myths that explain or fail to explain why the pyramids are here, why they must be built, and why, impossibly, they still endure. The official reason is simple enough, or so the priests insist. The pharaoh, a living god, requires a staircase to the afterlife, a structure so vast and precise that it guarantees his soul's safe passage to the heavens, where he will sit forever among the stars. The pyramid is a cosmic engine, a machine for immortality, powered by the sweat and bones of thousands. This, you are told, is the true meaning of your toil. But among the workers, the stories twist and multiply, weaving themselves into something far stranger and perhaps more honest. Some say the pyramids are traps for demons, built to keep the darkness in the desert from swallowing the world. Others whisper that the stones themselves are alive, that each one remembers the hands that shaped it and waits silently to be awakened. There are men who swear they have seen ghosts on the ramps, figures in linen, faces wrapped, wandering the edges of the site at night, searching for the names they lost in life. Then there are the riddles. Why do the pyramids point so precisely to the north? Why are their sides aligned with the four cardinal points? Why does the shadow of the Great Pyramid fall in perfect symmetry during the solstice? The priests claim it is all part of the divine order, that every angle and measurement is dictated by the gods. The scribes nod wisely, pointing to calculations and star charts as proof. But you have seen those same scribes make their own calculations by spitting in the sand and counting the marks with their toes. If there is a cosmic secret here, it is one the gods keep well hidden. At the fireside, someone always tells the story of the hidden chamber, the secret room buried deep within the pyramid, filled with treasures or curses or the answers to every riddle ever asked. You have heard it 100 times, each version wilder than the last. Sometimes the chamber is a place of eternal life, guarded by the spirits of dead kings. Sometimes it is a trap, built to punish the greedy or the curious. Once, a storyteller claimed to have seen a scroll within, inscribed with the true name of God, a name so powerful it would undo the world if spoken aloud. You laugh with the others, but you catch the nervous glances, the way hands tighten around amulets. Other myths are darker. There are whispers that the first pyramid was built not by men, but by giants or by the gods themselves, and that every king since has merely tried and failed to copy their work. Some claim the pyramids are warnings, not monuments, a reminder of a forgotten disaster, a message to the future carved in a language no one now speaks. There are those who say that if the pyramids ever fall, the Nile will run backward and the stars will vanish from the sky. Your favorite theory, shared with particular relish by a carpenter who claims no fear of gods or kings, is that the pyramids are simply an elaborate joke. Imagine, he says, that a bored pharaoh pointed at a hill and said, "Build me one of those, but with more stairs." The others laugh, but there is a nervous edge to it, a fear that the truth, if it exists, is less grand than everyone hopes. You realize, as these stories swirl around you, that no one really knows why the pyramids are built the way they are, or why, after all the centuries and all the storms and invasions and neglect, they still stand. Maybe it is the stone itself, the sheer scale of the project, or the endless repairs and prayers. Or maybe it is something simpler, the stubbornness of those who built them, the refusal to let their work crumble, even if their own names are lost to the wind. The riddles persist. Why here? Why this shape? Why so much suffering for so little thanks? The priests promise answers, the overseers demand obedience, and the workers, yourself included, find meaning where they can, in laughter, in rumor, in the hope that what you build will outlast you. You rise from the fireside, the stones cool against your hands, and look up at the pyramid silhouetted against the night sky. Its lines are too perfect, too deliberate to be anything but a question. You do not know the answer. Perhaps no one does. But you feel, in that moment, the weight of all the stories, the riddles, and the myths, heavy, eternal, and utterly human, resting what beneath the surface of the stone. And as you walk away, you cannot help but wonder, perhaps the greatest mystery is not why the pyramids stand, but why anyone ever tried to build them at all. You do not see the pharaoh often. His world is far removed from the mud and sweat of pyramid building. But every so often, there is a commotion at the riverbank. The market freezes mid-argument, and even the most hardened overseers stand a little straighter. The king is coming, or rather, the king's shadow, a flotilla of gilded barges, a blaze of banners, the shimmering rumor of godhood floating closer on the morning mist. Today is one of those rare days. As the first light climbs over the river, you hear the drums, the music of harps and flutes, and the shouts of officials scrambling to arrange things just so. The site is swept, as much as sand can ever be swept, and the foremen line up the strongest, cleanest workers along the main ramp. The rest of you melt into the background, faces down, pretending to be invisible, or at least irreproachable. No one wants to draw the king's gaze. His blessing can mean a double ration, but his displeasure is always heavier. You watch from behind a stack of blocks as the royal procession approaches. The pharaoh himself sits beneath a golden canopy, surrounded by priests, generals, and his most trusted scribes. He is younger than you expected, or maybe simply untouched by the grind that marks every laborer. His face is carefully painted, his beard braided and stiff with wax. On his brow sits the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, a symbol of unity, though everyone knows unity is a matter of constant negotiation and occasional violence. As the king descends from his barge, the overseers drop to their knees, and the priests begin their endless chanting, calling on the gods to bear witness to his greatness. You have heard it all before. The Pharaoh is a living god, the mediator between earth and sky, the reason the sun rises and the Nile floods, the one for whom the pyramids are built. You wonder sometimes if he believes any of it, or if, like everyone else, he has simply learned to play his part. The king's visit is part inspection, part performance. He has shown the progress, rows of stone, the rising ramps, the endless labor. The foremen exaggerate their numbers. The scribes recite lists of materials and miracles, and the priests remind everyone that each block is a step toward eternal life. The Pharaoh listens with the patience of someone accustomed to flattery, but you notice the flicker of irritation when a block is misaligned or a ramp cracks underfoot. His gaze is sharp, and you realize with a chill that the pyramid is not just a monument to his glory, it is an extension of his will. Any imperfection is an insult. There are stories, whispered in the camps, about kings who visited their pyramids at night, wrapped in secrecy and anxiety, pacing the unfinished chambers like restless spirits. Some say the pharaohs are terrified of death, obsessed with the idea of being forgotten, their need for immortality driving every command, every cruelty. You have seen the way their eyes linger on the stone, measuring, imagining their own bones lying beneath. The pyramids are promises, the biggest ones ever made and the hardest to keep. The king's entourage is a mobile court, high officials arguing over precedence, generals bored and restless, servants sweating beneath their golden collars. You catch snatches of conversation, complaints about the heat, the flies, the unending lists of offerings. There is nothing divine here, only the grinding machinery of power, those who serve, those who command, and those, like you, who exist to make their dreams real. Yet, for all his distance, the Pharaoh is also trapped. You see it in the way he hesitates before the priests, the way his gaze flickers toward the workers, and then away. He is a prisoner of his own legend, forced to perform the role of living God while fearing the same decay, the same oblivion as everyone else. The pyramid is his answer. If he cannot live forever, at least his name, his monument, might endure. You wonder if he knows how little the stones care. After the inspection comes the blessing, a perfunctory prayer, a splash of scented oil, a promise that the gods approve. The king's voice rings out, formal and practiced, declaring the laborers loyal and the work holy. For a moment, you feel a twinge of pride, even hope, but it fades quickly. Tomorrow will be just another day, with more stone, more sweat, and more distance between your world and his. When the royal procession departs, the overseers' voices snap back to their usual volume, and the market resumes its chaos. The workers exchange glances, some relieved, some resentful, all returning to the routine. The king, you realize, is not so different from the rest. a man at the mercy of tradition, fear, and the need to be remembered. As the sun climbs higher, you watch the golden barge drift away, leaving only the unfinished pyramid behind, a monument not just to one life, but to the stubborn refusal of all lives to be forgotten. The pharaoh will be remembered, they say. But you suspect that the true measure of his reign is not the pyramid, but the countless hands, hearts, and backs that raised it. You shoulder your burden and walk back toward the shadow of the stones, hearing, somewhere behind you, the distant echo of drums and the faraway voice of a man who needs it all and will never quite have enough. There comes a moment each evening when the furious pace of the pyramid site slackens, if only for a breath. The last blocks for the day are dropped, sometimes literally, and the overseer's bellowing takes on a weary note. The sun, which has been both tyrant and timekeeper, slides toward the horizon, painting the river gold and the desert in bruised violets and ochres. You find yourself pausing at the edge of the scaffolding, lungs burning, watching the play of shadow across unfinished stone. Sunsets by the Nile are beautiful, in the way that wounds are beautiful, a sign of what has been endured. The heat lingers, radiating off the sand and the pyramid's face, but the air cools quickly. The workers gather in loose clusters, silent or softly murmuring, their silhouettes elongated across the site. No one has the energy to talk loudly now. The day's aches settle deep into bone, and you sense a collective longing for sleep, for food, for something softer than stone. It is at dusk that the site feels most ancient, most haunted. The clang of hammers and the crash of sledges fade into the memory of the day, replaced by the restless sigh of wind and the distant calls of water birds. Somewhere nearby, you hear the first notes of a flute, a tentative, plaintive sound, as if the music itself is afraid to draw attention. Some workers simply sit, staring at the slow crawl of shadows, while others nurse injuries in the gathering dark. You catch a mother calling her children, the sound sharp but not unkind, a thread pulling her family back together after hours apart. And then, sometimes, the desert reminds you that nothing here is truly safe. You feel it first as a prickling at the nape of your neck, a subtle shift in the air, the sudden hush before a storm. The sandstorms, when they come, do so without mercy. One moment, you are brushing dust from your feet. The next, the wind whips up, carrying stinging grit that grinds into your eyes, your mouth, your thoughts. The seasoned workers move quickly, covering baskets and fires, gathering the youngest and the oldest into whatever shelter they can find. You hurry to tie a rag over your mouth and nose, blinking furiously. The overseers, for once, are silent. They know the futility of shouting at the wind. The pyramid disappears behind a veil of red dust, and the world shrinks to the taste of sand and the rasp of breath. These storms can last minutes or hours. Time warps. The air vibrates with static, and the only constant is the sound of sand hissing over stone. Some say the spirits of the desert ride in the storms, searching for the careless or the unlucky. Others believe the gods themselves use the wind to scour away the day's failures, leveling the playing field until only the most stubborn remain. When the storm passes, as suddenly as it arrived, the sight emerges raw and altered. Fine sand fills every crack, buries tools, erases footprints. The workers reappear, shaking dust from their hair, rubbing eyes red and swollen. Fires are rekindled, pots of stew set bubbling, stories exchanged about whose tent collapsed, whose rations vanished, whose patience wore thinnest. The pyramid itself seems untouched, indifferent to the chaos below, its edges sharp against the indigo sky. Evenings after a sandstorm are quieter. The day feels older, somehow, as if each storm adds another layer of history to the site. Meals are eaten in silence, bread and beer consumed more as ritual than pleasure. Children drift to sleep curled against mothers or older siblings, and the talk around the fires turns inward, tales of other storms, other hardships, the days when nothing seemed to go right, and the nights that lasted forever. The ancient Egyptians have rituals for closing the day. A small offering, bread, a splash of beer, a muttered prayer, is set by the door of each tent or shelter. The hope is simple: to wake again, whole in the morning. You join in, not because you believe it makes a difference, but because everyone else does. It is a habit older than the pyramids, a quiet act of defiance against uncertainty. As the stars climb, the temperature drops. You wrap yourself in a tattered cloak, listening to the wind fade into memory. The work site is transformed from a place of noise and ambition to one of ghosts and wishes. Somewhere, a child laughs in her sleep. Somewhere, a man sobs softly, mourning a friend or a future that slipped away in the dust. You stare up at the pyramid, its silhouette black and endless against the sky, and for a moment you are not sure if it is rising or sinking. You think of all the days like this one, how many storms, how many sunsets, how many hopes buried under sand. You wonder what will last: the stone, the stories, or just the memory of trying. Tomorrow, the overseers will return, the sun will rise, and the rhythm of labor and loss will begin again. But for now, you let the darkness settle. You let yourself become just another shadow at the base of something larger and older and more mysterious than you can fathom. And as you drift toward sleep, you hope that for a few hours at least, the sand will be still, the gods will be merciful, and the dreams will be kinder than the day. Night settles over the pyramid site like a balm and a warning, cooling the scorched sand, but also waking the restless spirits of the camp. If the days belong to stone and sweat, the nights belong to words, whispered, muttered, sung, or spat by the flickering firelight. You find yourself among small knots of workers and families, clustered around weak fires, their faces flickering between shadow and flame, the hush of exhaustion punctuated by laughter, grumbling, and the unmistakable thrill of gossip. It begins, as most things do, with a rumor. Someone swears he saw a priest slip away from the temple at midnight, clutching something glinting under his robe. Another claims the bread today was thinner than yesterday and blames a market woman's new lover who supposedly delivers half the flour and keeps the rest. There are tales of a mason who found a scarab buried inside a stone block, a bad omen if ever there was one, and tales of workers who wake at night to find their tools rearranged, as if the spirits of the dead are building their own pyramid after. Dark. The biggest rumors, of course, are about the pyramid itself. Around the fire, you hear the low, urgent voices of men speculating on its purpose. Was it really a tomb for the pharaoh, or a prison for something better left forgotten? One man, then, who claims his grandfather helped start the foundation, insists there is a secret tunnel leading from the king's chamber all the way to the Nile. Another has heard that if you count the blocks from base to summit, you will know the years the world has left before the gods return. Superstition is the mortar that holds these rumors together. You listen as a woman describes the curse of the unfinished block, that every time a worker tries to leave the site early, he is followed home by misfortune until he returns. There is a nervous silence, then laughter, and a quick spat of spitting into the sand to ward off evil. Even the most skeptical among you, those who sneer at the priests and snicker at the rituals, carry amulets, tie blue beads around their children's wrists, and avoid whistling at night. Stories of punishment and reward are retold, embroidered with every telling. A worker boasts that he escaped the overseer's notice for 3 weeks straight and saw his rations double. Another claims he heard the pharaoh himself mutter complaints about the priests, proof that even the highest in the land are not safe from the grumbling of lesser men. There are dark jokes about promotion, meaning a longer ramp to climb, or retirement, being a euphemism for vanishing into the quarry forever. The most popular gossip, of course, revolves around love and scandal. Who is meeting whom behind the bread ovens, which overseer's wife visits the market a little too often, and which children are truly fathered by passing traders from the Delta. The stories are as creative as they are unprovable, but in a world ruled by mud, sweat, and stone, imagination is often the only luxury left. You also hear the legends, passed down from worker to worker, growing taller with each generation. There is the tale of a man who insulted the gods and was struck blind before he reached the river, or the story of the woman who buried a lock of her hair beneath the pyramid and became blessed with 12 healthy sons. Some whisper of the night watchers, spirits or ancient kings, who roam the site to ensure the pyramid's completion. The message is always the same: respect the mysteries, obey the rules, and never boast too loudly of your luck. Yet, for all the darkness and warning, gossip is also the glue of community. Around the fire, laughter chases away the worst fears. Workers mimic the high priest's intonations, turning sacred hymns into bawdy songs. Children trade wild stories about crocodile gods and desert monsters. The women share recipes, complaints, and sometimes secrets that make even the men blush. You realize, listening to the murmurs, that the night is as necessary as the day. The day builds the pyramid, but the night builds the stories. Stories that help you remember who you are, why you endure, and what it means to survive here. In the morning, the overseers will march through the camp, and the priests will remind everyone of their place. But for now, in this uncertain glow, everyone is a little more equal, a little more alive. Before you drift off to sleep, you hear a final round of warnings. Do not whistle after dark. Never step on a cat's shadow. Always leave a crumb of bread for the wandering spirits. You nod along, knowing that tomorrow the cycle will begin again. New rumors, new fears, new tiny rebellions whispered in the dark. As you lay down, head pillowed on your arm, the stars overhead seem closer, as if listening in on the gossip themselves. And you think, with a faint, wry smile, that long after the last stone is set, it will be the stories, the tall tales, the warnings, the laughter that truly survive the ages. The pyramid looms largest at dawn, but its secrets are darkest at midnight. All day, you have watched the blocks rise, layer upon layer, but as you approach the nearly finished monument in the quiet, you cannot help but imagine what lies beneath its cold surface, beyond the gaze of the overseers, the priests, and even the pharaoh. For every stone that faces the sun, there are countless others that vanish into shadow, forming a network of corridors and chambers that only a handful will ever truly see. No one but the highest architects and the most trusted laborers are permitted inside the growing pyramid's heart. That, at least, is the official rule. In truth, every worker knows someone who slipped in after dark, returning wide eyed and tight lipped, carrying stories like scars. You have heard them yourself, traded at firesides, tales of hidden rooms, of traps waiting for the greedy, of lost souls who entered and never returned. The main corridors are wide enough for two men to pass, just barely, their shoulders scraping chalky dust from the walls. You have crept into one once, with a lantern borrowed from a friendly scribe. The air inside was colder than you expected, close and heavy with the tang of stone and ancient sweat. The passage sloped upward, then downward, the angles all wrong, as if designed to confuse anyone foolish enough to trespass. Your footsteps sounded too loud, and you quickly learned to keep one hand on the wall at all times. More than one unlucky explorer has been lost in these mazes, their cries echoing until silence swallows them whole. At intervals, you find small niches carved into the walls, offerings to forgotten gods, prayers scrawled hastily in soot. There are chips of broken tools, scraps of linen, a bead or two, proof that even those trusted to work inside the pyramid cannot resist leaving their mark, a desperate plea to be remembered by the stones. There are rumors of a sealed room deeper in where the names of every worker are written, not on papyrus, but on the blocks themselves, hidden forever from the eyes of kings. And there are stories, always, of traps. The architects, so the tales go, build false doors and blind passages, filling some corridors with heavy stones, ready to slide down at the pull of a cord or the careless touch of a foot. These are meant to guard the pharaoh's treasure, to catch thieves and tomb robbers before they can disturb the king's rest. You have never seen one triggered, but you have heard the aftermath, a sudden shout, a muffled crash, and then nothing at all. The overseers call it natural selection. The priests call it justice. The workers call it bad luck. Deeper still, past the places where even the foremen hesitate to linger, are the burial chambers themselves. Rooms designed for eternity, lined with smooth stone, sealed with heavy doors and curses. You have seen one once when a priest gave a rare tour to impress a visiting official. The chamber was empty, save for a single unfinished sarcophagus, the air so thick with incense you could hardly breathe. The priest recited prayers in a trembling voice, and you understood that, for all their bravado, even the men of the gods are wary of these silent tombs. There are those who believe that these inner rooms are not empty even before the king arrives. Some claim that the first of the dead are buried secretly inside: sacrifices, unlucky workers, the condemned, meant to guard the pharaoh's journey, or perhaps to test the traps. You have never asked too closely. Some stories are better left unconfirmed. For the vast majority, the pyramid's interior will always be a mystery. The workers talk of corridors that go nowhere, of doors that open to blank walls, of shafts that drop into darkness. A few boast that they have mapped the labyrinth in their heads, but none dare put those maps to parchment. It is said that the pyramid shifts at night, its passages realigning, its secrets reshuffling. Whether it is true or just another tale spun for the night, it is enough to keep even the boldest from straying too far. Sometimes you wonder if the king himself will ever know the truth of his own tomb. The architects die young, the blueprints are burned, and the final secrets are sealed behind stone forever. The pharaoh may rule in life, but in death, he is just another soul lost in the maze, hoping that the gods are better guides than men. As you leave the pyramid's shadow, stepping into the pale light of dawn, you feel the weight of its hidden chambers pressing against your thoughts. The monument is not just a tomb, it is a puzzle, a warning, and a promise. For every secret that comes to light, a dozen more slip into darkness, waiting for the next intruder to lose himself in their embrace. You brush the dust from your hands and remind yourself, sometimes the greatest legacy is not what is built in daylight, but what endures in the dark, unseen and unbroken beneath the mountain of stone. The end, when it comes, is less dramatic than you once imagined. After years of sunrise toil, shouts, sandstorms, and bruises, the last block is set in place, not with fanfare, but with a weary grunt and a sigh of relief. There is no chorus of trumpets, no divine light breaking through the clouds, just a group of dirty, bone-tired men hauling a stone into position and stepping back to see what, if anything, the gods will do about it. The overseers are the first to cheer, eager to claim credit for the miracle of completion. They parade around the site, barking orders and congratulating themselves, scribes trailing close behind, furiously documenting every word. The priests appear, as if conjured, robes freshly laundered and faces grave. They carry incense and amulets, prepared to seal the work with a barrage of blessings and rituals. You and your fellows stand off to the side, watching the spectacle, unsure whether to feel pride or simply a strange emptiness. There is a ceremony, of course. The pharaoh's court assembles in a splash of color and gold, officials clutching scrolls, wives in beaded dresses, soldiers standing so still you wonder if they have turned to stone themselves. The king appears, radiant and remote, a living god who looks suspiciously like a man who has not carried a stone in his life. He speaks of glory, eternity, the gratitude of the gods, the greatness of Egypt, and the immortality his pyramid will bestow upon all. You listen, stone faced, knowing that the only thing that will outlast the king's words are the very blocks you have hauled. The ritual is as much about closing a chapter as opening another. The priests lead the court through the unfinished corridors, scattering sacred oils and murmuring spells to bind the place against thieves and spirits. The king places the final stone himself, hands guided by priests, feet cushioned by carpets, while the crowd murmurs and the scribes scratch out the official version of history. Somewhere above, a falcon circles, indifferent. You expect celebration among the workers, and for a few days there is a strange, almost giddy joy. There is more beer, slightly sweeter bread, laughter that comes easier. Some men carve their names one last time into a hidden crevice, daring the centuries to forget them. Others gather what little they have and drift toward the river, already dreaming of home, of peace, of a world without overseers or dust. But the triumph is short lived. For every man who leaves, another arrives, a new king, a new project, a new monument to begin. The site does not rest. The ramps are dismantled, the market contracts, but the world turns, and the river keeps bringing more stone, more need, more labor. Some workers, unable to imagine any other life, remain, hired on to patch and repair, to haul debris, or to start again on a smaller tomb for a lesser official. The pyramid becomes both relic and routine, a background to daily struggle, its edges softened by the sand. Oblivion, you realize, is the real fate of most who built here. The scribes do not write your names. The priests do not pray for your souls. The market women, the stone carvers, the children who ran between the ramps, none of these are mentioned in the records. The king's face is carved 100 times over, his titles repeated until meaning drains from the words. But your part is dust, breath, and echo under stone. Sometimes the new arrivals ask you for stories, what it was like to build the king's tomb, to see it rise from nothing. You find yourself struggling to answer. It was pain and hunger, jokes and fear, endless repetition, and flashes of pride. It was 1,000 small losses, 100 fleeting joys. It was life, compressed into the span between two Nile floods. The priests say the pyramid will stand forever, but you know even stone erodes. You look at the completed monument, its casing smooth and bright in the sun, and wonder how long the names and memories trapped within will last. You catch yourself trading your own name, scratched deep into a hidden block. If someone finds it, what will they think? Will they see a person or just a scratch, a mistake, a mystery to puzzle over for a moment before moving on. There is a feast of sorts to mark the end, a few extra onions, better beer, songs that echo off the stone. For a brief moment, everyone lets go of the burdens, and even the overseers allow themselves to relax, knowing tomorrow the cycle will start again. You listen to the voices rising and falling in the darkness and realize that this, more than the ceremonies or the stone, will be the memory you keep, the sound of people refusing to be forgotten, even as the world moves past them. When the fires burn low, you walk one last time around the base of the finished pyramid. You place your hand on the cold stone, feeling its silence, its weight, its utter indifference to your touch, and you understand this is what endures. Not the Pharaoh's glory, not the priest's prayers, but the stubborn, desperate, beautiful act of building, of making something that stands, even if no one remembers the names that made it so. In the darkness, as the echoes of the feast die away, you let the monument claim you, just for a moment, as one of its own. Morning, the air is thinner now, and the Nile drifts quietly, as if it too is pausing to remember. You stand once more at the water's edge, the work behind you, the pyramid rising in the early light. It is finished, or as finished as anything in this world ever truly is. In the silence, you hear not the clatter of stones or the bellow of overseers, but the soft wash of river against bank, the distant call of a heron, the heartbeat of a land that has carried you this far. You look at the pyramid, its outline sharp and arrogant against the pale sky, and you feel a strange mixture of exhaustion and awe. This thing, this impossible, relentless, magnificent thing, exists because of you, and yet, you know, it does not belong to you. It belongs to time, to sand, to all the kings and gods who will come after. It belongs to the future, even if it forgets your name. You close your eyes and try to remember how it began. The first days on the bank, the squelch of mud, the chill before sunrise, the boats heavy with stone, the endless march of sledges and rollers, the bruised hands and hollow stomachs. You remember the faces, some long gone, some still here, etched with worry and pride, marked by laughter and fear. You remember the women, quietly holding the camp together, the children's games among the ramps, the hurried meals of bread and beer. You remember the priest's rituals, the overseer's punishments, the stories shared in darkness to hold the night at bay. Every mark on your body, every scar and ache, is a record of days spent in the shadow of ambition. You know now that immortality was never really for you or your kin. The Pharaoh may rest beneath his mountain of stone, his name chiseled on every wall, but your own legacy is more fragile, more secret, carried in whispered stories, half faded graffiti, a handful of names hidden in cracks and corners where only the curious will ever find them. You wonder if the pyramid will keep its promises. Will it truly last forever? Will the gods remember who raised it? Or will it become just another riddle for strangers, future travelers who walk these banks, staring up at the ruins, puzzling over what kind of people would spend their lives on something so huge, so enduring, and so deeply pointless. A gust of wind stirs the dust, swirling memories into the air. You imagine, for a moment, a time far beyond your own, a world of scholars and thieves, of explorers and dreamers, all picking at the bones of what you have made. You hope, against hope, that one of them will pause, run a hand over a chipped block, and wonder about the person who left a joke or a prayer scratched into its surface. Perhaps that is enough to have built something so vast that it forces even the future to stop and think. You realize now what history never says, the paradox of your existence. The people who built the wonders are never remembered, but the wonder itself stands because they would not be forgotten, not in the only way that matters. You are anonymous, yes, but you are also eternal, buried in the heart of every stone. The sun climbs higher, gilding the pyramid's peak, and the first workers of a new day begin to gather by the river. The cycle will start again, another monument, another king, another group of men and women trading their years for a promise of meaning. You watch them, feeling at once older than the river and as young as the first reed ever broken for a basket. You take one last look at the pyramid, and this time you let yourself feel a flicker of pride, not in the king, not in the gods, but in the quiet, stubborn, unyielding spirit that built something meant to outlast even memory itself. Perhaps, in the end, that is all anyone can hope for. You turn away, footsteps already erasing themselves in the dust, and walk back into the slow, unstoppable river of history, leaving behind a monument that is both your tomb and your testament. A monument that will stand, as you once did, against the morning, waiting to see if anyone will remember not just the kings, but the people who made eternity out of sweat, laughter, fear, and 1,000 silent goodbyes. You are gone, but the pyramid remains, and somewhere beneath the weight of all that stone, your story waits to be found.